Welcome back here on the Gamma Project. I'm with one of my clients, Kevin, all the way from Hong Kong, and we are here to discuss metabolic syndrome and the impact that insulin resistance may have on one's cells or entire physiology. Welcome, Kevin. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Oh, I can't complain. Thank you very much. Kevin, exactly what would you like us to discuss or give light to regarding insulin resistance and a associated metabolic syndrome that might be derived from impaired insulin sensitivity?
We're a bit frozen on. Oh,
There we
you've
go. We're
moved.
back. We're back. We're back. We're back. Back in the game. So yeah, just as we mentioned before, Kevin, what would you like us to discuss regarding insulin resistance?
Well, I think that the broader question is, I mean, insulin resistance leads you to have raised levels of insulin in your blood, and people worry about that blood sugar. And your project, you review blood sugar because insulin's a very expensive thing to measure, and insulin isn't on the standard panels or historically hasn't been because it's just a difficult thing to measure. But I've read in a few places a thesis that actually it's the high insulin that makes you gain weight and also has other issues around your body. And I'm just interested to hear what you think about that. Is it the high insulin that's sort of forcing your cells to suck in fat, and then making you even hungrier? And you know, what do you think about that? Is that a reasonable hypothesis that people are making that I've seen?
It's kind of the scenario between what came first, the chicken or the egg, in all honesty. So yes, if you do become insulin resistant, it will influence certain segments of the brain that help and control appetite regulation. And the hormones to which, or would be reference to, are leptin and ghrelin, and in particular leptin. So when one becomes insulin resistant, they become desensitized to the sensation that leptin may provide to the central nervous system once you've had a meal. In other words, how full do you feel after having a meal? So if you are leptin resistant, you might find that after you having, 1,000 calories, you still feel as though you can gorge on another 1,000 calories because your body just doesn't have that sensitivity of understanding to when is enough. And insulin resistance can really cause and exacerbate that issue. But on the flip side of that as well, it's quite funny that most of the time, a lot of the clients that come on board that may have been eating, an extreme amount of calories for many, many decades, they always say to me, "I'm not used to eating this much food." And the
And
reason,
I had that with you the first time I worked with you. I couldn't cope with the eating, and it was the first time I ever lost a lot of weight since I started working. And anyway, before and so it was extraordinary. I just could not keep up with the volume of food. I mean, I did it, but it was just such hard work to eat the amount of food you're asking to eat.
and that's exactly it. It's a kind of it's a funny situation because if you look at the quantity of the food, you would think it's more, but the density of the calories are far less. And what one needs to also appreciate is the nutrients that are contained within each of those calories are far greater than that would be in refined or manufactured sources of food as well. So although you're perceived to be eating more, in essence, you're actually eating less calories but more nutrients. And in doing so, you create a scenario whereby your entire physiology or your biochemistry is given the raw material it requires from everything from hormonal production to neuropeptide production, which enables better balance of neurotransmitters in the brain, giving you a sensation of more calm or balanced excitation, not excessive excitation in the brain. And that's very, very important to note, is the fact that in the world in which we live in, and a technologically advanced society, and which is only growing in its advancement in a daily fashion, we are becoming more excessively excited because of an abundance of external stimuli, which is causing an imbalance of neurotransmitters, and in essence also causing overuse of certain raw materials, which in essence are nutrients for the production of these excitatory transmitters to be released in the first place. So yes, if you think about insulin resistance, like does insulin resistance cause, an imbalance to perception of food? Most definitely. But what causes the scenario for insulin resistance to occur in the first place? This is the bigger pressing issue to contend with, to get to the root or the solution to which we can handle an imbalance of insulin sensitivity, which is pretty much what insulin resistance could be equated to. So just for those viewers out there, insulin resistance, in a very short, brief explanation, would be whereby the receptors on the cell membrane aren't receiving insulin or the signal from insulin, which is a hydrofolic based hormone. And to be able to access certain messengers within the cell to respond to storing not only glucose in the form of glycogen, but the associated nutrients that those glucose molecules may provide to the cell itself. So insulin resistance is when the receptors can't quite grasp the message insulin is trying to tell the cell. So what happens is the body eventually starts to produce more and more and more insulin than what it should, creating a higher insulin load than the body should be naturally accustomed to handle in order to deliver that same message. And over time, when that body becomes exhausted, or the pancreas becomes exhausted through the PD-1 cells that release insulin, eventually what we have is a scenario of either type 2 or progressively even possible type 1 diabetes as well. And in that scenario, type 1, you obviously need insulin support, exogenous insulin to manage the glucose flow within the bloodstream, or in type 2, possibly initial stages of type 2, which can progress also into insulin use, but may just be glucose disposal drugs such as metformin required for the use of just ridding the body of excessive glucose, or glucose disposal as well. Now, that's an extreme scenario that one can eventually get into when the body doesn't able to recognize the message that the hormone insulin is trying to play to ourselves. And that's in essence what insulin resistance is. It is the dampening of the message that insulin is trying to relay to our bodily cells. All right. So, and anytime a hormone becomes dampened in its relay of its message it's trying to create, initially we have a up ramp of the production of that hormone until the organs or to certain cells within those organs become exhausted, at which point we will start to require external or exogenous hormonal support in order to create a healthy metabolism within our physiology, which is not optimal, because that means that we will be reliant on medical intervention for years to come thereafter. So that's in essence what insulin resistance is. But from what you're asking, Kevin, is does insulin resistance have a big role to play in not only appetite or a sensation of need for some type of food, but also rather how the body stores fat or retains fat, right? Now, fat is retained in an anabolic environment. Insulin is the most anabolic hormone known to our bodies. If you were to take a scenario whereby the body becomes desensitized to the signal, to the message that a hormone like insulin is trying to relay, we increase the production of insulin, right? So the insulin load goes up. And the greater the amount of insulin load, the greater the potential of not anabolism only occurring to muscle cells, but also predominantly fat cells. If we have heightened levels of glucose associated with higher levels of insulin, which is generally the case when we become insulin resistant, hence the reason why our glucose control becomes a bit of an issue, then we also have a scenario whereby those glucose molecules, which the body isn't disposing of appropriately, can actually fuel triglyceride cell growth. So in other words, they can actually, instead of fueling muscles to grow in their volume and size by a process of glycogen retention or other transcript factors that can be released through interaction of insulin and muscle cells, it can actually create transcript factors or growth factors to be released in lipids or fat cells as well, which is not
Yeah.
the ideal scenario. But the reason why the body does that in the first place is because when we do become insulin resistant, in essence, we lose the ability to release and store energy effectively or efficiently. So in a nutshell, we lose our energetic efficiency within our biology. When we lose energetic efficiency, the best type of nutrient or the best type of cell of which to increase, or nutrient which to increase storage of, would be that of fat, right? Because fat is the most calorie dense form of a nutrient through the three major forms of nutrients that we have within our diet, being protein, carbohydrates, and fat, available for energy itself, being giving 9 calories as opposed to 4 that carbohydrates or protein may provide us as well. So by increasing the storage of fat, in essence, the body is trying to protect itself through its inefficiency of energy uptake and production as well. And that's hence the reason why we become fatter when we become insulin resistant, and also the reason as to why insulin resistance can also fuel processes within our brain to disassociate between feeling hungry or feeling full, leading to increased volumes of glucose coming into the system, and in particular, increase the volume of refined sources of glucose coming into the system. So to take out the science, to try to put it into like a logical terms, if we were to put a scenario whereby okay, so we have 2 cars. We have 2 motor vehicles, right? The one motor vehicle has fuel injection. The other one has a carburetor, right? So that's right, carburetor, right, Kevin? Difference between a combustion engine and fuel.
They all have carburetors, some have fuel injection and some don't.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I'm terrible when it comes
Carbureting
to motor engineering. Thank you for saving grace.
mixes the petrol and the air together, and as it gets pushed into the I'm into the cylinder. But I'm no expert either. So, yeah.
I think you know a lot more than I do about cars. I know how to drive them and put petrol in and check the water and oil. That's about it. All right, so we have 2 motor vehicles. One has fuel injection, the other doesn't. All right, the one that has fuel injection in it, all of a sudden it would be able to utilize the fuel effectively. It's not going to use as much fuel, so it's not going to require the car to go to the gas station and continue to fill up the gas tank, right? Because it's utilizing it more effectively. So your visits to the petrol station would be fewer and far between, as opposed to the motor vehicle that doesn't have fuel injection, right? But that's to say that all the other components within that motor vehicle are functioning in the right capacity. So everything from the fuel intake pistons or filters are working properly, to the other filters are working properly. But when a filter stops working properly, that fuel injection engine may start to overuse petrol and also become inefficient in its production of energy or through combustion. All right. So similar to how the human body works is when we get in a nutrient source, a food source that has a high amount of nutrients attached to it, the body generally has to work harder to metabolize that food source than a food source that has been refined, has very little nutrients, but a lot of energy. All right. Now, if you were to put yourself in a position for the central nervous system, right? The central nervous system right now says, I need energy in order to function, and I'm not getting enough energy because of inefficient, energetic insulin and glucagon or catecholamine balance. All right. So it says, okay, but I need that energy. But right now, digestion is not doing really well. Assimilation is doing poorly. So would you, in that scenario, what would you think the brain would do? Do you think the brain would rather increase your desire for a food source that takes energy to break down in order to capture energy? or a food source
Exactly.
that doesn't
Exactly.
require as much breakdown.
You're pushed to eat something simple and quick. It comes into your blood quickly, and your body doesn't bother taking the fat out of the cells, which is what it's meant to be doing. That. But then, if you're there, um, if you walk past the cake shop, you're not having any cakes. You just happen to walk past the cake shop, and you get the smell of the cake in your nose. Isn't your body pumping out insulin in preparation that the body thinks you're about to eat a cake and you're going to need the insulin to break it down? I mean, and then you're kicking off the cycle. So if you're really in this process of trying to be healthy, I mean, is it bad to watch other people eating terrible food? Um,
It's a very, very good question to ask, and it comes down to any type of rehabilitative program. Right? If you listen to any motivational speaker or any psychologist, they say the most important thing to change in a person's strategy for rehabilitation is their environment. Right? And there's a common saying: those you spend most time with are those that you're going to most emulate as well. Right. So if you're going to spend your time in a scenario with a lot of baked goods around you, or sitting at a pub with your friends while they're having a few lagers, or going out to a pizza joint and trying to have a meal with your family, you decide to have the little side Greek salad with a bit of antipasti, but then all of a sudden your family's having pasta and pizza galore. You're setting yourself up to fail. Because the environment is going to dictate an emotional response and a memory recall as well through that emotional response. Now, there's a segment in the brain called the ventral medial hypothalamus. Now, the hypothalamus is very much so reliant on its communication between the thalamus and the hippocampus as well within the mesencephalon region of the brain. Now, I'm throwing out a lot of big terms and putting a little bit of science in there, but in essence, one segment would control emotion recall. The other one would control memory recall. Now, the two together would create an environment or a scenario whereby our brain would derive something as being threatening or beneficial. Okay. If you had the history of consuming a certain type of food that benefited you within that moment with either psychological relief from reducing cortisol, which sugar does, right? Insulin and cortisol are inversely proportionate to one another, meaning that if insulin becomes elevated, cortisol will become suppressed and vice versa. So in a scenario whereby you're stressed and in one moment in your life, your boss has been coming down at you, you've been working 48 hours, you haven't seen your family, you feel as though the sleep is literally going to solidify, your eyelids shut, and you're never going to be able to open and see anything in the world again. And that scenario, and all of a sudden you're like, fuck. Ooh, excuse me. You say, oh, bugger all that. I'm now going to go to the vending machine and grab a Snickers bar. You grab a Snickers bar, a tin of Coke, consume that for the next hour, you feel great, right? You feel like the stress has been taken off. You feel energized, right? Because it's giving you immediate form of energy that doesn't have hardly any nutrients attached to it, if none at all, especially in a ton of Coca-Cola, there's no nutrients in it. And all of a sudden, you get all this energy spurt, boom, boom, boom. But that energy spurt, just remember, when we produce ATP, we don't only need glucose to produce ATP, but we need a huge list of other associated nutrients, from oxygen to B vitamins to vitamin C, not to mention iron as well, through its whole complex structure of what we call oxidative phosphorylation to occur, which gives mitochondria the ability to produce ATP. Now, when you're taking a lot of sugar in, but hasn't got those nutrients, those raw essential building blocks for the process of producing ATP, what's going to happen is that your body is going to use what's already stored, right? So your stored your storage of raw essential nutrients that are required for the mitochondria. It's going to tap into your natural stores, your bodily stores. And once it starts to tap into that, it starts to deplete those stores, right? And the more that you deplete your own nutrient stores within the body, eventually the body starts to go into a state of stress, because it's trying to convert other nutrients, other amino acids, into that particular form of nutrient or amino acid required for that enzymic process or complex of processes to occur. So you start depleting, more energy, depletion. Eventually the body becomes stressed, and you become resistant to certain hormones like insulin. And by doing so, you create this kind of set in the memory and the central nervous system. And with that, there's a link very much to the emotional recall as well. So all of a sudden, when your body is going through detox and you're eating clean, right, and you want to abstain from, that McDonald's burger or that Snickers bar or that tin of Coke or that pizza, right? You want to abstain from having yourself a nice margarita pizza, and you're instead having a nice piece of fillet steak and broccoli and some avocado. The fillet steak, the broccoli, and avocado are going to give you far more nutrient density, right, than white flour will give you. I mean, it depends on the base. They might get some nutrients from whatever toppings are on the base of the pizza, but in essence, the white flour is probably causing a lot of problems in your small intestine with bacterial overgrowth, unwanted bacterial overgrowth, which is depleting your nutrients to a further extent. Now, you're going through a process where you're cutting out any additions into your diet that may cause bacterial overgrowth, that may deplete your nutrient density or enzymic density for certain reactions to occur, from that of digestive reactions to immune reactions, okay? But by doing so, by giving the body more raw essential nutrients, you also ramp up your detoxification, all right, which is stressful, all right, for a particular period of time. So you're going through the stressful situation through increased capacity of detoxification by eating healthier. Just forget about exercise. Just by eating healthier, your body already starts to shift those processes. And then all of a sudden, you decide that your environment should include walking past the bakery. Right? You smell, the olfactory system has a huge part to play with the midbrain, all right, in particular when it comes to memory recall. So all of a sudden you smell something, know when it's either rancid or it's approachable. So you smell something and all of a sudden, oh, it's really approachable. So then, boom, on the subconscious level, starts to trigger an emotional response. Then emotional response starts to trigger positive memory response. Not the negative, memory recall, but the positive. And then you think to yourself, oh, you know what? Just one piece of pie, or just one donut, or just one chocolate pan, or the chocolate, whatever pastry it is, right? It's going to be sweet. It's not going to cause any harm. It probably won't. But the problem there is, all of a sudden have set motion to improper habits or poor habits, whereby it's like anybody with any type of addiction, whether it be a serious addiction like recreational drugs, or a more mild addiction like watching and going on social media for prolonged periods of time. All right, any addiction, in order to cut an addiction off, there needs to be a clear, defined line that says that this addiction is bad for me, and there's no middle ground. Like a little bit's okay. I'll be fine. It's like anyone stop smoking. Often more than not, I've heard guys say, "Oh, I'm just gonna have one drag, just one cigarette, I'll be okay. Tomorrow I'll stop." Tomorrow comes. By the end of tomorrow, they're so stressed out because they've all of a sudden started stimulating all those nicotinic receptors in the brain. Tomorrow night comes around, they're like, "Oh, I really want a cigarette." The day after, I really want a cigarette, and they give in. And then all of a sudden, one cigarette becomes 4 cigarettes in a day, and then 4 become 10, and eventually they're smoking a pack a day like they were before they stopped smoking. And this is a domino effect. It depends, and it comes down to the individual, right? So someone that has insulin resistance needs to be very careful of the environment that they immerse themselves in, all right? Because it can start to trigger an emotional recall to comfort. And when you are going through detoxification, which happens when you're trying to reset the body out of a poor metabolic status, you're more than likely going to fall off the wagon. Right? It's like anybody with any type of addiction. Alcoholic shouldn't go into a bar, all right? Because it's going to cause an emotional recall, and more than likely they're going to fall off, right? It's a sex addict shouldn't go into a strip club. The list goes on. So whatever your ailment is, whatever your addiction is, just remember, an addiction forms through an alteration of chemical processes within the brain. All right. So whether or not something's physically addictive or not, psychological addiction comes from alteration of processes or synaptic processes that occur within the central nervous system, which occur through a perception received from our environment. right? So everything from the way in which we move, from the way in how we read and how we learn, how I'm able to have a conversation with you on the computer is derived from how my brain is receiving information through processes, right? Either from how my olfactory system is working, how my oculomotor system is working, how my proprioception to those systems is allowing me to sit upright and have a conversation with you. All those systems are regulated by the environment itself. All of a sudden, if there were to be a blizzard and the temperature were to drop by 5 or 10 degrees, I'm not going to be able to concentrate as well as what I am right now having a conversation with you. And that is an orchestrated response from my central nervous system saying, you know what, this isn't as important as surviving a temperature drop, right? Now, the same thing happens in your mind, but on a subtle, less dramatic way if you are in exposure to means which cause disruption to your endocrine function. And disruption to the endocrine function is also going to cause, is primarily more derived from disruption to the neurological system. Okay, so as soon as your neurology starts to go in a state of discord, it generally is going to cause a state of discord to occur in your endocrinology as well, because they're very much closely associated. When neurotransmitters are released, they cause a sequence of events to occur, releasing other hormones throughout the whole body. All right, so just to recap everything for you is, if you are, your question, if you're going to be walking past a bakery and you're trying to reestablish good habits and you do have insulin resistance, no, choose a different path to go to work, right? Try not to walk past that bakery. Like, once your body stabilizes itself and you don't have insulin resistance any longer, and you've been able to establish healthier habits within your lifestyle through eating and exercise and all those good things, then exposure to these environmental stimulus will not have as much of a cause and effect on your physiology. And the same can be said for any impaired state.
Well, you might sweet in your mouth, and even though there's, there's no calories in the, your body's reacting, thinking something sweet's coming in the system, and the insulin's going to get set off again, isn't it?
Artificial sweeteners, diet cokes. You know what? You're better off having a tin of full. I don't know why they call it full fat, because it's not full fat, it's full sugar, right? It's very, it's a very misleading term. Full fat Coke. It's not full fat Coke. It's full sugar Coke. Anyway, you're better off having a tin of regular Coca-Cola than Coke Zero, Diet Coke, Diet Pepsi, Diet this, Diet that, because the effect that aspartame has on glutamate receptors in the brain is far more dramatic than that of sugar. All right, and glutamate is one of the most, well, is the most excitatory neurotransmitter that can cause an effect to the cortex within our brain, right? Creating global disruption, so global polarity, hyperpolarity throughout the whole body, meaning that all your cells become excited, going bah, and when you go bah, you release a lot of what? Stress hormone, right? And you release a lot of stress hormone. What do you think your brain is going to tell you to do to combat that heightened level of stress hormone?
Have some sugar.
Boom. And how many times do we see, especially in American culture, so a guy goes into a supermarket or a girl, and they're overweight, because unfortunately there's a high rate of obesity in America, right? And if you look in the shopping trolley, you will probably see a bag of some form of crisp or some form of junk food, along with some healthy food, right? Because they try to balance it out. But their soda of choice is a diet soda, right? Oh, I'm drinking Diet Coke. It's great. You know, it's cool. I'm making that step. I'm not drinking full sugar soda anymore. But they're doing themselves a complete injustice. They're actually better off having full sugar soda. Not that you should have that if you're trying to reset your metabolic status, but they're better off having full fat. Now I'm getting back into that horrible rhythm. Full sugar soda than going in and trying to have a sweetener-based drink, because of the effect that it has on the brain. Yes, sugar does cause a huge dopaminergic effect in the brain, right? And dopamine is more of a neuromodulating neurotransmitter than an excitatory transmitter that most people think it is. But however, if dopamine releases in high amounts, it causes a huge release of glutamate. Okay, but sugar will create initial heightened release of dopamine, not initial high release of glutamate. Whereas artificial sweeteners go straight for the kill. All right, there's no relay of how things become more metabolized or certain transcript factors become more active, or other receptors become more active, allowing a sequence of other transmitters to be released. This goes straight for the jugular. All right, so you drink some Diet Coke, all of a sudden you feel energized. Have you had a tin of Diet Coke and after having it felt quite refreshed? Have you ever had that sensation, Kevin?
I think so. It's been a while.
Right.
I'm banned from all sodas in the house, but yeah.
Perfect answer considering you're one of the Gamma Project clients. I'm really happy you answered it that way. But you've had it in the past, and I think most people can attest to this. And unless they were to drink diet soda on a continual basis, whereby the effect of the drug, which is aspartame, it's a drug, would become dampened, just like any other drug. If you utilize an abundance of any drug over long periods of time, if the receptors become desensitized to its effect. But those who don't, and I've had a Diet Coke in the past, and the first Diet Coke, or had a Diet Coke every once in a while, you probably would feel a lot more invigorated, a lot more aware, a lot more very refreshed. That refreshed feeling is a release of catecholamines, which is mediated through a release of glutamate. So excessive glutamate starts to cause excitation to receptors of sympathetic nature of the autonomic nervous system, which lie between the first thoracic vertebra and the second lumbar vertebra, so along the whole part of the spinal column, which for the most part, that's where people have most of their tension and pain, right? Because they're overworked and overexcited, not due to poor posture, but due to poor stress modulation and management as well. So when you have a lot of coffee, a lot of stimulants, you not only are stimulating your adrenal glands, but you're also stimulating certain receptors along the spinal column. Okay, excessive stimulation of those receptors can cause huge issues to your alignment, which can cause massive issues to your fascial integration. And poor fascial integration can also compress your organs, leading to further issues of metabolic syndrome, right? If the pancreas is compressed, if the liver is compressed, in essence, those organs become compressed and stressed out. And any tissue that is compressed or any cell is compressed for a long period of time, in essence, will become inflamed. All right, and an inflamed tissue is tissue that acute inflammation is designed for the process of healing. All right, prolonged inflammation, however, will cause cells to decay or to die. All right, and in doing so, not only is your proprioception going to become displaced, you're not going to, how often in the corporate world, Kevin, do people realize where their hips are as opposed to their shoulders? If you try to get and I'm sure you've seen it when you were training back with myself and another colleague of mine in London, with other colleagues that maybe came from a previous company you worked for, great guys, awesome enthusiasm, but when they came in, they tried to do a hip hinge. It was very little movement happening in the hip and far more movement probably happening in the spine. And that's a disassociation of proprioception that occurs when you overwork a certain segment of the body. And there's no greater way to overwork the segment of your spine than creating excessive stress, because stress is going to target those exact receptors that cause the spine to become stiff and rigid. And also the segment of the spine that actually protects and houses all the vital organs.
No idea about that. That's very interesting.
Well, receptors for parasympathetic interaction are located in the cranial and the sacral regions of the spine. So if you were to have a neck massage, you feel a lot more relaxed, right? Have you ever gone for a neck and shoulder massage before, or have anybody come into the office and give you a neck and shoulder massage?
Not to me. There's too much there. But my wife is very keen on a neck and shoulder massage, and she does generally feel very much happier afterwards. It's a good way of getting. So But the thoracic's always a bit sore. Thoracic region's always a bit sore, and you haven't even been lifting. You've not been sitting too badly. You've not really done anything, and your thoracic's a bit sore.
Yep,
And
that's.
I thought that was probably just long-term injuries, but actually that could be stress.
But think about this long-term injury. If tissue is is being recruited, not becoming, sorry, is being recruited. I apologize for my terrible English. Is being recruited along that compartment of the spine, right? It's going to cause that tissue to become overly aware or hyperactive, okay, or what we call in kinesiology hypertonic. And when tissue is hypertonic, it can neither shorten to its full capacity nor lengthen to its full capacity. So all of a sudden, say now in your earlier years when you first went to the corporate world and you try to maintain, you did rugby when you were younger, Kevin?
I did. I did when I was younger.
Right. And in your high school years, did you perform better? And when I say perform better, have less injuries than you did in your 20s?
Um, Yeah, look, I guess the only there were no in. I mean, there weren't the. I mean, yeah, night and day. But I mean, as you get into the 20s and the 30s, the injuries are sort of, you've done nothing and you've got an injury. You've got a lift slightly wrong on an angle, or your foot's placed wrong as you're running, and then next thing you're in pain. Whereas, to get injured at that point in time took a massive impact. Movement didn't create injury. Something stupid like a massive miss of a ball and huge hyperextension as you kick, or just a big impact where you fall a long way and get hit hard was the only things that would sort of give injury.
And people associate that with an increase of age, right? It's always associated, oh, you get older, it's normal. That's how people think, but it's not normal. It's not normal at all. It's not normal to get injured. If it were normal to get injured, then we were not organically designed to live on this earth. You don't see animals that get into their later years of life. You don't see a gorilla that gets older being more prone to injury than when they were younger. All right, a gorilla functions pretty much the same capacity throughout its whole life. The difference is in our culture and society. Even if you look at the youth now, we had a conversation about this the other day. As iPads and tablets and computers being given now to youngsters in schools for the process of learning. And there's so many studies that show that people do not learn as well from an artificial interface like a computer screen or a tablet as well as they do learn from paper or hard copy, right? But just looking at the youth, the rate of injury, physical injury, the youngsters are now picking up during sporting activities is greater in percentage than it ever has been.
Well, and they're not necessarily on average. I mean, the performance is higher, obviously. But if you're just talking about the average person, I mean, I have a much younger brother, and some of the injuries he's picked up trying to play sport, low level sport, and really really serious injuries. And part of it's actually just sort of coordination. And I thought it was perhaps unique to my brother, but it's not. There does seem to be at the average level, certainly in London, a lack of sort of physical adaptability. And the real thing is, you think about a lot of the activities you conducted when you were young and reckless. Mm-hmm. And you've had some scrapes, but somehow your head just falls to the side, and it catches the side of your head. It doesn't get your mouth, or it doesn't get you. A lot of the time, and it seems like that kind of reaction time and just sort of body awareness to which bit of the body to pull out of the contact. He certainly struggled with. I mean, he's really massive facial injury from quite innocuous kind of, he's a goalkeeper and going into a collision with a forward coming in. I mean, I'd been there playing rugby many, many times in much bigger collisions, and, no one's ever been really hurt most of the time anyway.
This is, the reason for that is that there's more stress now, unseen stress, than there's ever been before because of stimulus. Right, it's an abundance of stimulus coming to our species, in particular the youth. All right. So we were discussing before, we thought, there's an idea that as you get older, you just become more injury prone. That's just the way life is. I disagree with that completely. I believe that the reason why people become more injury prone when they get older is because they're exposed to more stimulus than what they were when they were younger. Now, stimulus is not just running around in the sports field. Stimulus are the unseen forces that bombard our bodies and minds on a daily basis. Everything from this computer screen to your smartphone to recreational habits that change. When you become an adult, you go and have a few drinks with a few of your friends, or you might have smoked a cigar or whatever at some point in your youth. So all those habits obviously influence the chemical structure of what the body has to contend with. But regardless of the chemical structure, the chemical influence of technology and what it has in terms of the electromagnetic frequencies of which they do emit have massive impact on our cells, and in particular, our neurons as well. So as soon as our neurons become hyperexcited, we start to orchestrate a strategy to try and maintain a form of homeostasis in some way, some form, by recruiting more sympathetic reactions within our spinal column, which is derived through orchestration in the central nervous system. All right. So just to give you an example, looking at this computer screen, you and I have been having a conversation now for a while. If we look at the beginning of this video, you and I were both sat back. Now, you and I both leaned forward. Why do you think that is?
I don't know, just
So the fight or flight response, right? Initially, no matter what anyone says, it's not a question of being alpha or not being alpha. Most of us will have a flight response to get away from danger, not to go toward it. We're conditioned to have a fight response. We're naturally conditioned to have a flight response. Any animal is going to rather get away from danger than confront it, all right? It makes sense as well. Why would you waste energy confronting something if you can spend less energy just getting away from it? But if you can't get away from a stimulus that's causing a stressful response, your immediate reaction is to go toward it, to defend yourself, right? We were looking at this computer screen only for a little while, not for very long. We were both sat back comfortable. Initially, we leaned back a bit, and then gradually, you and I went forward in toward the computer screen. And that is this much of a window of time for what this artificial stimulus is doing to our brain. Now, can you imagine what an 8-hour, or in your case, 20-hour workday is creating, or creating a cause and effect to your central nervous system, and how it's influencing your periphery? Everything from endocrinological function to fascial integration to cardiovascular function becomes impaired. It becomes dysfunctional because, in essence, you overuse systems which are supposed to be stored and kept dormant for periods of real need or serious need, right? So it's like, you have a nuclear arsenal, and you're America, you have a nuclear arsenal, and you're just keeping a few, warheads stored secretly in Nevada, and then, you worry about China coming in. But all of a sudden, China starts to come in all the bloody time, and you send as many nukes as possible. Guess what? There's not going to be much left of the world, is there? So the autonomic nervous system, sympathetic reactions are like your nuclear warheads, only supposed to be released in times of need, right? Not in abundance. But we've gone from requiring their need to be few and far between to being more regular. And, if they're saying what doesn't kill you only makes you stronger, it does not apply to the scenario. Because the more you overstimulate an autonomic nervous system, sympathetic reactions, sure, if you did it for brief periods of time and allow adaptation to set in, you would get stronger. But if you don't allow for recovery, not just for recovery from a workout, but recovery from technological exposure, you're going to overwork that system. And by overworking that system, you're going to cause your body to shift its homeostatic norm, because that's what the body does. It's very well in tune and regulated within its own construct. And by shifting its homeostatic norm may cause you to become insulin resistant or diabetic, or may cause cancer cells to start to grow. And that's what happens when we have improper shifts of homeostatic norm. Another way to look at the autonomic nervous system is the difference between anabolism and catabolism, right? Everybody knows about catabolic, anabolic. Well, most people do. One that breaks down, one that builds up. Sympathetic, parasympathetic. Parasympathetic actions induce more anabolic reactions. Parasympathetic, anabolic, sympathetic, catabolic. So if we are more sympathetic, in essence, we're becoming more catabolic and we're breaking down. Nothing wrong with breaking down energy, but there's something wrong if you continually seek to break down energy because you start to break down your body.
Yeah. Wow. A lot, Justin. It's a lot in a short period, but that's been very, very interesting.
Just to finish off on a high note, there are certain measures one can take. Diet is a great way, exercise is a great way. Obviously, as you know, nutraceutical intervention does help. But all that is pretty much useless unless you change your environment, like I said before. And I'm not just talking about psychological environment, I'm also talking about stimulus of environment. So to try and stop work may not necessarily be the most economic approach to your recovery strategy, but things like photobiomodulation, which is a therapy where they use low-level light laser treatment to help mitochondria with the impact of artificial stimulus like that from technology, can really help in the strategy, really aid in your strategy toward optimal recovery. So it's not a question of going to live in the jungle, although I'm sure a lot of people after listening to this are about to go and do. It's not a question of completely distancing yourself from the modern day world. It's just understanding that with great power comes great responsibility, and that responsibility is education into means of therapy or intervention that would protect your nervous system, your central nervous system, from the exposure of all these non-natural electromagnetic frequencies. Now, I'm not saying you can have full protection because it's virtually impossible, because it comes at you from every which direction, not to mention the depletion of the ozone layer, which is increasing radiation throughout the whole world. It's very hard to escape that. But there are things you can do, like wear blue light blockers. There's a program called F.lux. So Flux, which is a great program you can install on your computer that helps you change the frequency or the harshness of the light that your computer is emitting. All right, so that it's not as F.lux, yeah. So that doesn't influence your brain as much as if you were on full spectrum blue light in the late hours of the evening toward your natural, or toward altering your natural circadian rhythm. So the light dampens as it becomes in the early hours of the day, and as the day becomes a bit later, it becomes more yellow in its nature than instead of white or blue in its nature. So if you guys do want, if those of you out there are interested in photobiomodulation, please email me at info@hulkenterprisesltd.com. I have a few colleagues that specialize in neurology. I'm not a specialist in the field of neurology. I just know a little bit to be able to give you guys some input and insight toward recovery strategies, of which great specialists that are in my network know how to do very, very well. Happy to send you guys to these great therapists in order to help you perform at higher capacities in your workplace within the corporate lifestyle, or just to help you with the effects that stress might be causing in psychology in high performing positions in the corporate lifestyle as well. So just email me on that. Kevin, are there any other questions that you would like answers to today?
No, it's good, man. Very, very, very good session. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Guys out there, thank you for tuning in to the Gamma Project. More Q&A sessions coming up with real-life clients on real-life topics and subjects. It's not just about an avocation, but very much about an education, giving you the understanding as to why things are happening so you can possibly create a strategy to prevent them from happening any further. Have a great day, and thank you so much for your time. Take care.